DND number 8, June Flower, in Jesus' name. Chapter 2. Mark stood to the door. Mark stood at the door to the hospital room and took in the scene. His family was before him, and even though at the moment they were not in great shape, they were all alive, for which he was extremely grateful. For the 100th time, he raised his eyes heavenward and whispered a thank you. His eldest son, Jojo, had a concussion. He had 48 stitches in his chest. He sported 2 black eyes, a split lip, and was being carefully monitored. In the second bed, his adopted son, Logan, was still groggy from the anesthesia used when they set his broken arm. He also had a slight concussion. His wife, Bella, whom they thought a few hours ago was going into early labor, was sitting in a reclining chair between the 2 boys and had drifted off to sleep. The baby was fine. All Mark could do was be grateful because things could be so much worse. He came forward with the cup and thermos of herbal tea his mom had just brought and knelt next to his wife. "Bella," he whispered, watching as her blue eyes fluttered open. She smiled at him. "Hi. How are you feeling? Any more contractions?" "No, I'm fine." She placed her hand on her swollen abdomen. "We're fine." "Good." He rose slightly so he could kiss her. "Mom brought you some tea. She's worried about you." "Oh, is she still here?" "She went down with Eric to get something to eat, and she'll be back up soon." "She's so good to me." "She loves you, Bella. We all do." Bella smiled. "I know. You and your family are the best things that ever happened to me and Logan." His smile faded. "Oh, Mark," she said softly, "tell me you're not feeling guilty about this." "I'm not sure what I'm feeling. It hurts to see children suffer. I know that. But, sweetheart, they're alive, and they'll recover. They'll be even stronger for this. I don't regret for 1 second that Logan and I came into your life. I'm sure he would say that a little broken arm is no big deal." "That's exactly what I would say," Logan said softly, trying not to wake Jojo. Mark smiled up at him. You might not say that when you realize that you're not going to get to play in the state football playoffs." "Yeah, that sucks, but I've got next year. I'm just worried about Joe." "He's going to be fine," Bella said. "You don't worry." Logan looked over at his brother. Legally related through Logan's adoption, Jojo and he were closer than any brothers could be. "He looks terrible," Logan complained. Jojo opened his eyes. "Thanks, bro. Back at you." Logan smiled. "I don't look nearly as bad as you." "You both look absolutely beautiful," Bella said. "Not beautiful," Logan argued. She laughed. "Okay, then what? Ruggedly handsome?" "Yeah, that sounds better," Jojo muttered softly. "Dad," Logan began, "I just want you to know what Jojo did." "Shut up, Logan," Jojo commanded. "You shut up," Logan countered. "They were going to use me, Dad. They were going to cut me up because I was the youngest, and they said hurting the youngest would hurt Jeffy more or something like that. But Jojo stopped them. He challenged them to a fight. He told them that I wasn't Aquino, that I was adopted, but when that didn't seem to help, he challenged them and called them chicken and finally riled them enough to take off the zip ties and fight him. He took out one guy. Pretty sure Jojo broke the guy's nose, but that was why they all jumped on him. They beat him so bad, I'm surprised he's alive. It was a guy with a broken nose who cut him. Jojo did it all to protect me. He's a hero." "You know I didn't mean that part about you not being part of our family, right?" Jojo said. "Of course. I knew exactly why you said, what you did, Jojo. I guess all I can say is thank you. But I'm also mad at you for doing that." Jojo chuckled. "Well, sorry I made you mad. You can get me for it later." Bella reached out and took Jojo's hand. "Thank you, my hero. I love you, Jojo. I hope you know that." He smiled. "Yeah, I know. I love you too." "I'm proud of you, son," Mark said softly, bending to kiss his son's forehead. "It was no big deal, Dad, really. I couldn't sit there and watch him slice at my brother without trying to do something." "I'm so proud of you too," Bella said. Mark smiled. Jojo had never known his biological mother. His grandmothers were the only mother figures he'd had until Bella had come into their lives. It felt so good to see him respond so easily to Bella's love. He glanced at Logan, who was smiling at him. Mark knew that Logan was happy to share his mother's love with Jojo, and soon with a new baby sister. He was a lucky man. Yet, all was not well. Mark's little sister, who'd been special from the day she was born, was in danger. The men who'd roughed up his boys had instructed them to report that Jeffy is to cease and desist all of her work. If she didn't, either she would die or those she loved would die. They'd chosen to use Jojo and Logan to make their point. They must have known that a threat to her own safety wouldn't stop her. He hated that Jeffy was having to go into seclusion, yet he had no doubt that she was not running scared. She was simply slowing things down, playing her own game. She'd chosen to bide her time, and when she came back out, she would do it with both guns blazing. They were about to face a hard time, but he'd been taught all this life, he'd been taught all his life, that sometimes things are difficult. All he knew was that none of them would be able to rest until their family was all together again. Early in the morning, he would be meeting in Jason's office at Ameritech Security with the rest of the men in the family, plus a few of the outsiders who are considered family. They would be meeting with their secret weapon, a highly trained operative who was one of the first members of a group simply called Jason's Elite. This man, summoned Friday when Kimmy's car had been pushed off the bridge, would not only be Jeffy's shadow, he would be the family's eyes and ears where Jeffy was concerned. New scene. Scott wasn't tired. Even if he hadn't slept on the private jet Jason sent for him, he had a feeling he still wouldn't be able to sleep. His sleep cycle was messed up not only because he'd spent the past 3 months in Turkmenistan, a country on the north borders of Iran and Afghanistan, and his days and nights were mixed up, but because he was in Jeffy's proximity. At this moment, she was only about 20 miles away, probably sound asleep and looking all soft and vulnerable in her bed. He'd spent the past 5 years of his life training for this day when he would be called upon to protect her. She'd been the focus of everything, his purpose in life, and now that he was so close, it was making him crazy. He had it in his mind to go over there. The Keno home was on high security, but he's sure he could get in with or without help. He didn't need to wake the family. He just wanted to see her, to lay eyes on her. He shook his head. It was ridiculous. It was the middle of the night, and he had to meet with the family first thing in the morning. He'd see her soon enough. Still, the idea wouldn't let him rest. He'd worked too hard. He'd been through hell. With the help of Jason Lee and the Keno family, he'd been transformed from a naive ex-college football player into a hardened field operative. Scott wasn't his real name, but it was what they called him due to his Scottish ancestors. Some would call him spy. Some would say special ops. Others would even say assassin. He was none of those, and he was all, depending on his mission. He'd been trained to kill, and he had killed, but only in self-defense or to save an innocent life. The images still haunted him. Killing was never easy, but the alternative, the loss of innocent lives, was not acceptable. He believed, as did the Kenos, the Adams, and the Lees, that the good guys, the strong guys, had a responsibility to serve and protect the innocent from the bullies of the world. That was what he'd been trained to do, and in order to do that, he had to be the strongest, the hardest, the fastest, the best, because only the best was good enough to stand watch over Juneflower Keno. Pacing back and forth across the living room of the small apartment that he'd called home on and off over the past 5 years, he thought about his life. He didn't regret the decision he'd made to join Ameritech. The path he'd been offered and accepted had been a godsend, an answer to a problem, and the only way he could see to fix that problem. He owned nothing. Even the custom-made motorcycle out front had been provided by Ameritech. He had nothing other than what he'd made of himself. Grandmaster Keno, a man he respected more than any other and thought of as a father, had told him many times that what he'd accomplished was a considerable feat. Scott accepted that praise graciously. He had come a long way. His own parents had never given two figs about him. Out of the 40-something high school football games he'd played, they'd attended three. Three. And then he'd received a full athletic scholarship to Oregon, and he was sure they'd be happy about that. And not only were they not home the day he left for school, they never even attended a single game. After the first year, he'd stopped expecting and stopped hoping. Even when he was home, they barely ever spoke to him. They'd made it plenty clear that he was nothing but a bother to them. 3 years ago, they divorced. His mother ran off to Italy with some aging rich playboy. His father headed to San Francisco with his executive assistant, who was only 2 years older than Scott himself. He tried only once to contact either parent. They hadn't had time for him. He wrote them off. He'd had a best friend all through high school. She'd gone to New York to attend college. They'd tried to stay in touch, but new friends and busy lives kept them apart. He made a mental note to try to reach her before he left the country again, which would be in about 2 days. Scott made his way into the small kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and stared at the shelves. Someone had bought a few groceries. There was milk and eggs and fruit and some meat wrapped in butcher paper, but he wasn't hungry. Closing the door, he ran a hand through his dark hair. He could go out, hit a couple of hot spots, but that wouldn't fill the void. The void was deeper than anything could satisfy. The only thing that brought him solace was his newfound belief in Jesus. And when he prayed, he felt peace. When he prayed, he felt truth and love and serenity. But right now, he couldn't get the girl out of his mind. Blowing out of breath, he realized he had to do it. He had to see her. Decision made, he moved quickly, slinging his black bag over his shoulder. He was gone. New scene. She was dreaming. She knew she was dreaming, and yet she had no desire to wake, for she wanted to see where the dream was leading her. Light glowed from under a giant golden door. She stood poised to turn the handle and open the door, but before she could, angelic beings approached her and handed her gifts of various sizes. Small, square, golden boxes, larger rectangular ones, all wrapped up and glittering with shining silver and gold ribbons. They heaped them on her until her arms were full, and they opened the door for her, and she stepped through the portal. She fell through darkness and finally came to rest in a beautiful meadow filled with soft green grass and beautiful flowers. Spying a path that led across the meadow, she moved forward, hurrying when she thought she heard the sound of a bubbling brook. And then the darkness fell. Suddenly, she couldn't see where the path led. Shadows flitted across the path, causing her to trip. A whip of darkness lashed out and circled her wrist. She struggled against it and finally broke free. Then another whip caught her leg, another caught her arm, some tangled in her hair. The dark strands pulled her away from the path and from the light. She struggled to break free, to make it back onto the path, to find the light. She fought with all her might, but the darkness seemed so strong, she decided she wanted to wake up. But now, she couldn't. Scott gazed down at Jeffy as she slept. She whimpered softly, and he had to fight the urge to wake her and take her in his arms. Seeing her lying there, her long, dark curls spread out over her pillow, the slight frown on her beautiful face, the pout of her lips, the pulse point on her throat beating wildly, was like a balm for his aching heart. He wondered what she was dreaming about that made her so restless, what nightmare brought about her whimpers and soft cries. He thought about the event that caused them all to call upon him. Someone tried to kill her. They tried to kill an angel, one who had the power to truly change the world. They would try again, he was sure of that. No, she murmured softly. He leaned close. Shh, baby, sleep. I won't let anyone hurt you. His mouth was so close to hers. He breathed her in and closed his eyes, cherished her sweetness. A warrior stepped forward out of the darkness. He drew his sword, and light flashed from its blade. The light drove back the darkness. He slashed at the dark tethers that held her, and they fell away. Grabbing her hand, he ran with her toward the path, but a horrible scream arose from out of the darkness. The world began to tremble, and she and the warrior tumbled and fell down, down over rocks and dirt to land at the bottom of a mountain. They looked up at the mountain, and she wondered how they would ever get back to the top. Shh, the warrior said. Don't worry, and don't be afraid. We'll make it together. He then pulled her close and laid his lips on hers. Jeffy sat straight up, gasping for breath. Immediately, she reached for the light, and her eyes darted around the room. She totally expected to find someone there, but the room was empty except for herself. Rising, she moved to the window and looked out over the front lawn. For just a moment, she thought she saw a fleeting shadow, but knew it must be the effect of the dream on her psyche. She rubbed her hands up and down her arms. New scene. Scott watched her lithe form as she stood in the window. She truly did resemble an angel standing there with the light behind her. He'd taken a chance by coming to see her, but he hadn't been able to resist. Deciding he'd better make his way back to the beach, he edged around the side of the house and toward the back deck. He moved quickly and silently out toward the beach and south, the way he'd come. Scott turned for a last glance at the house and came up short when he saw Grandmaster Keno on his balcony, looking directly at him. Slowly, he turned to face that balcony and bowed. And Grandmaster Keno returned the gesture. New scene. Jeffy looked over at her mother as they rode in the back seat of her charcoal gray sedan. Shelley smiled at her, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. Everything is going to be okay, Jeffy said, doing her best to offer comfort. Shelley nodded, her lips trembled. Of course it is, baby girl. It's just that, well, I'm going to miss you so much. Remember when I went to Africa those 2 summers and then again for 9 months when I turned 21? You got through that okay. Just pretend I'm on a trip. Well, someone wasn't trying to take your life back then, Shelley returned. Well, they'll stop trying as soon as the press conference is over. Shelley nodded, looked toward the 2 Ameritech agents. One drove and one sat shotgun. Do you remember the last time we sat together in the back seat of my car with bodyguards in the front? Jeffy nodded. How could I forget? I was 7, and Tommy Crane was trying to hurt us. He was trying to hurt your father. He was trying to kill you. It seems to be a theme, someone trying to kill my baby girl. Jeffy reached out and took her mother's hand. Isn't it funny, Mom, that he tried to kill me with the disease I just eradicated? All glory be to God. Well, funny isn't the word I would use. Shelley squeezed Jeffy's hand. And yes, all glory be to God. So I should take comfort in that. If God is using you to do some of his work, then surely he'll protect you. Exactly. So don't worry, Mom. I'm not afraid, and I don't want you to be either. You and Dad have taught me that there are times that we have to do what we have to do, even though it might be difficult. I'm going to try very hard to live up to the examples that you and Dad and my sister and brothers have set for me. Well, I want to take it all back, Shelley said, half joking, but only half. I want to put you inside the golden cage and keep you safe. Jeffy smiled. Her mother had so often used that analogy of what we can't do when raising children. We can't put them in a little golden cage and keep them safe from the world. For without freedom, they could never truly grow and learn and be happy. What good is being safe if there are no feelings of freedom and joy? If we aren't free to live and make choices, if all our choices are made for us, then we'll never learn and grow and evolve. This time, Jeffy squeezed her mother's hand. I know you don't mean that, Mom, but I understand your maternal need to keep me safe. Trust me, everything is going to work out. The truth of that statement struck her. Remember those words, you'll need them. She'd grown used to God's still small voice inside her head, and she trusted the advice. Mom, things might get bad, but whatever happens, just know that everything is going to be okay. Shelley looked into her daughter's eyes and realized that she was giving her more than just a platitude, and she nodded. Jeffy thought about her connection to God and then of the experiences she'd had when she and her father attended the attended the Intuition and Psychic Training Conference, and then enrolled in the Association for Psychic Enlightenment Research. They'd learned a lot, but knew, of course, the association would be very New Agey in their thinking. And one of the things Jeffy and her father found was false in their teaching was that though there may be a divine light or a universal power, they pretty much denied God. They denied Jesus Christ, a huge blasphemy. New Age had become Satan's tool, part of the occult, pulling baby Christians away from their beliefs. Jeffy thought at first it had been comforting to meet others with many of the same abilities as herself. She'd felt much more at ease and even learned some tricks in how to hone her gifts and how to really listen and how to receive guidance and understand the answers. Her dad had done his best to help those they spoke with at the association to open their minds to the possibility that God was real and very active. They'd been asked to never speak about or even mention the name of Jesus while they were there. And that had been the end of that, for neither Jeffy nor her father could deny Jesus. Not ever. Jeffy was roused from her reflections when the car pulled up to the hospital. First, they'll go inside and check on Jojo and Logan, and then when the men return from their meeting, the entire family will stand side by side outside the hospital while Jeffy gives a statement to the press. She will inform them that she will be taking a hiatus from her research for an indefinite period of time, while she gives her mind and body time to relax and recuperate from the strict schedule she's been keeping. She and the family will then field a few questions, and within 24 hours, Jeffy will be making a clandestine departure from the country. New scene. The room quieted when he came through the door, escorted by Joey. They'd been looking at surveillance maps that were spread across the large conference table. A high-tech radar map lit up a clear board behind the table, and Jason had been in the process of zeroing in on a particular location. There were so many technical gadgets, computers, and communication devices in the room, it resembled a NASA operation. They all dropped what they were doing and moved forward, hands extended, smiles wide. Dude, Ricky said jovially, it's been a long time. Good to see you, man, he said, as he pulled him in for a hug and a pat on the back. Mark followed suit, as did Justin Lee, Agent Jeff Davis, and Agent Keegan Tanner. Every single one of them had taken part in his training, some more than others, but he was grateful to them all and had immense respect for them. He moved forward to shake Jason's hand. Sir, he said. Jason shook his hand, nodded. Cameron. He twitched at the sound of his own name coming from Jason's lips. They'd all called him Scott for the past 5 years. They'd decided to change his name so they wouldn't accidentally mention his real name in front of the women, specifically Jeffy. It felt strange now to hear his name. All this time it was as if he'd taken on a different persona, and now he was suddenly able to assume his real identity. Jason shook his hand heartily. Their eyes met. Cam knew what Jason was thinking. He was thinking, this is it. This is the moment. This is why you trained so hard for 5 years. This is why you speak so many different languages, why you've traveled to Russia, Afghanistan, Iraq, North Korea, China, and every other hellhole. This is why you suffered through the torturous training and came out on top, so that you could be the one to protect Jeffy, because you love her, because it was the only way. I understand you went roving last night, Jason said, offering a slight smile. Cameron nodded, his eyes slicing to Grandmaster Kino before he answered. Yes, sir. There's no need to explain. Jason clapped him on the back. Eric moved forward and offered his hand. Cam, good to see you. Again, he said pointedly, a twinkle in his eye. Cameron nodded and smiled. You too, sir. Let's get this briefing underway, Joey said loudly. Press conference in 2 hours. New scene. A jet, a plane, a train, a helicopter, and a very long uphill hike, and Jeffy finally stood in the small, cold room that would be her home for the time. The abbot, Adani Shadan Janjuar, had much respect for her father and her family, even though they weren't Buddhists. Jeffy had met the abbot several times when she'd visited the Indian monastery with her father. Today, he had been cordial and accommodating. Not so much to her bodyguards, but he conceded, placing them in a room next to hers at the very end of the westernmost wing. Jeffy eyed the futon-like bunk, the small table with a single lamp, which would be the only light in the room. A square-shaped basket sat on the floor beneath a wooden peg attached to the wall. The peg was usually used to support monks' robes. The basket usually held the other few items the monks owned. She tossed her duffel bag on the bunk, then carefully pulled off her backpack, unzipped the main compartment, and extracted her computer. Smiling, she set her computer on the table. She always smiled as she set up her computer and fired it up because her computer was a work of art in itself. It held inside its tiny microchips the latest, most highly advanced technology. With her computer, and thanks to Ameritech, the use of military satellites, she could and would be able to research from anywhere. She had links to 3 of her worldwide labs and assistants ready to help with anything. She had access to every database she'd ever need and would be able to communicate with her family and with Ameritech through coded and encrypted messages. Her sister, Bree, had told her it was like she would be a high-tech heavenly spy. Jeffy didn't know how heavenly she was, but she knew that what she had to do was important to every living person on the earth. That was the main reason Janjuar had allowed Jeffy and her bodyguards the extended stay. That and the fact that the Dalai Lama had sent his greetings and warm wishes for an enlightening visitation. She turned at a soft knock. "Come in," she said casually. Dr. Kino, I'm going to ask you to be a little more cautious," Agent Coley said as he came through the door. Jeffy eyed the man. His looks reminded her of Agent Jeff Davis way back when she was 7 years old and totally smitten with the man. Blonde hair, neat and trim, pretty face, broad shoulders. Young Agent Coley had been selected to protect her out of hundreds of prospects. He'd been chosen because he was good and because he was unattached. His tour of duty was only supposed to last 2 months, but he'd insisted that he wouldn't need the break, so he was here for the duration of her stay, which at this time they had no idea how long it would be. Shrugging her shoulders nonchalantly, Jeffy grinned at him. "I knew it was you." "No, you didn't," he argued. "You assumed it was me. Make no assumptions." She saluted. "Yes, sir. Sorry, sir. Won't happen again, sir." She grinned. "However, I did know it was you." He nodded uncomfortably. He hadn't meant to presume to instruct the Dr. Kino, the psychic Dr. Kino. It was just that he had no intention of taking the job lightly. "Okay, well, anyway, I came to install this." He held up a small metal device. She watched as he attached the electromagnetic component to her door and smiled when he motioned her forward and gave her instructions on how to arm and disarm the device. To help lighten his mood and for her own entertainment, she stood close to him as he worked. Her psychic abilities kicked in, and she immediately sensed his nerves and increased heartbeat. He glanced up at her, and she smiled at him, noting the beads of perspiration on his upper lip. To his credit, his hands remained steady as he manipulated the lock. Finally, he finished and took a step away. You arm the door by pressing this button here and holding it for 2 seconds," he demonstrated. "That small red light will come on. If it doesn't, then you didn't hold the button in long enough. To disarm it, you press these 2 buttons in this sequence. Left, left, right, left, right." He looked up. "Please arm and disarm the lock now so I know you've understood." She laughed. "You're kidding, right?" He drew in a deep breath. "Look, I know you're smart and all. It's just that maybe I made a mistake in explaining it to you. I'll sleep better if you just humor me." "Okay," Jeffy conceded as she locked and unlocked the device. "Where's Agent Akins?" she asked when she was done. "He's in the next room making sure you opening the door registered on our alarm." "It did," came a voice through the button on Agent Coley's shirt. The agent nodded. "Roger that." He smiled at Jeffy. "Well, we'll be next door if you need us for anything. Anything at all," he stressed. "There is no such thing as a false alarm." Jeffy smiled. "I promise to keep that in mind, especially since you said those words to me dozens of times since we left the States." "Thank you, Agent Coley." He bowed slightly. "Ma'am." New scene. The man, known only as Dr. Black, swiveled in his chair to gaze at the man delivering the report. "What do you mean she's disappeared?" Payne shook his head. "No one has seen her for days." Well, maybe she's locked herself away inside that giant house. Well, if so, then we won't be seeing her because we haven't been able to get through their security. We can't even get a remote viewing system to work around that place. I'm pretty sure they're using a frequency jammer. The closest we've come to that place was on the beach. And you couldn't even get that right. Payne shrugged. The two women looked very much alike. Yeah, so you've said several times. So she could be in the house. Do the lights in her bedroom come on at night? Yeah, her lights come on, Payne said, wondering if Black truly thought that meant anything at all. But they could have 'em on a timer. Dr. Black nodded, seemingly satisfied by this information. Nonsense. Apparently, it is exactly what she said in the press conference. She is taking some time off. He turned and hit a button. The large flat screen immediately filled with images of June Flower Kino. I will be taking some time to myself. I'm sorry, but I need time to refresh my mind. Will you be doing any work in your lab in Zurich? I will not be doing any work or any research in any of my facilities around the world. How long do you intend to rest? I'm unclear on that, an extended period of time. Let me just say that I won't be checking into any of my laboratories any time in the foreseeable future. He smiled. At least she and her family were savvy enough to make that announcement. The Kino's reputation for honesty is known by both their allies and their enemies, not that he included himself in either category. That announcement should keep her from harm for a while. That is, if Eklon Loxall can control his paranoia. Dr. Black turned back to his man, Payne Lansk, a man who'd come with high credentials. Early 40s, retired Marine, lean and mean, and will do anything for the right price. Keep watching. I want to know if she goes out. That idiot Loxall will kill her if she decides to go back to her research. Payne gave his boss a mock salute. Black continued to watch the screen. Both he and Loxall wanted Dr. Kino to stop. They had too much at stake, too much to lose. Her brilliance would topple the world's economy. However, he differed from Loxall in that he didn't want her dead. He couldn't bring himself to destroy such a brilliant mind and such a beautiful creature. He wanted her alive, and he wanted her for more than her mind. He wanted her body and soul. He wanted her nod of approval and her respect. For now, he was simply glad she'd been smart enough to do the right thing and protect herself and her family by shutting down her research. Still, he wasn't fool enough to think that she would cave so easily. She was biding her time. That was fine, though, because he was doing the same thing. He could wait. New scene. Gasping, Jeffy sat straight up. The light from the not-quite full moon illuminated the small room, which her eyes quickly scanned. She was alone, no intruders. She'd been dreaming. She'd like to think that her dream meant nothing because there had been so much anguish and pain, but she knew that every dream meant something, sometimes symbolically, sometimes literally. The trick was to discern the difference. Unfortunately, this one seemed quite literal. She kicked off the blanket and went to the window and raised up on her toes so she could see out. The back courtyard looked lovely in the moonlight. The area was more of a workplace. In the morning, laundry would be hung, gardens tended, crafts created. Beyond the courtyard was an open field and then the wall, another large field and a grove of trees. Above it all, the peaks of the Himalayas, which at the moment were bathed in moonlight. She placed her hand on the window pane. The night sky called to her. Moving quickly now, she pulled on the linen pants and the long tunic that reached to her knees, swiped the blanket from the bed, and disarmed her door. Her bare feet made no sound as she moved through the stone corridor and out into the back courtyard. It was cold, but not unbearable. The climate here in northern India in December was not as brutally cold as one would imagine. The mountains actually blocked the cold Arctic air, leaving this area in a subtropical type climate. This time of year it was warm during the day. Yesterday had been in the 70s, and yet, even with mild daytime temperatures, at night, temperatures could plummet to below freezing. Tonight, she judged it to be in the mid-40s, which to her native LA blood was still quite cold. Moving out past the courtyard, she ran across the field, holding the blanket out behind her like a giant kite. She hadn't bothered to put her hair back in the usual braid she wore, and it felt good to have the cold air blowing through it, lifting the heavy dark curls as she ran. Tilting her face up toward the moon, she smiled, then laughed at herself, realizing what a spectacle she'd be making if any of the monks were to look out their windows, as she had. She finally slowed and moved further out, close to a tree that stood just yards from the wall. Spinning once, she dropped to the ground. She shivered and pulled the blanket close around her. She drew a deep breath and lifted her face upward, and as she bathed in the light of the moon and contemplated life, the tears began to course down her cheeks. Sniffing, she wiped them and then smiled again and began her prayer. "Forgive me, Father," she whispered aloud. "I'm lonely, and yet I know I'm not alone. I feel the weight of this burden, and I ask you for help. I ask for a clear mind so that I may accomplish my task quickly. I ask that somehow I'm able to overcome the darkness that doesn't want me to succeed. I know, Father, that you've set me on this task, and I put my trust in you. Please help me to know how to overcome this enemy. I have so much, and I give thanks for that. My family, without them, I could never have come this far. So thank you for them. And please, 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 Father, keep them safe. The circumstances I've lived with throughout my life have given me amazing opportunities, and they make it possible for me to be here in this place at this time. I have freedom to pursue what I perceive to be my mission. I'm so grateful for the freedom and for the opportunity and for the mission itself. I vow to stay the course no matter how hard this becomes. I will fight to the very end. I do this in love, not in vengeance, not in pride, only in love for all the people of the earth, and in love and gratitude for you and for the gift of your beloved Son. With what you're showing me, there will be no more disease, no more little children dying of cancers while their families watch in horror as they waste away. No more parents leaving their children, no more heart disease, which I know is absolutely preventable. No more government red tape keeping us from telling the world that they don't have to suffer with disease. She stopped, her head bowed lower. In Jesus' name I pray. In Jesus' name. In Jesus' name. Amen. When she lifted her face again, her eyes were closed. She drew a deep breath and placed her hands palm up, facing upward on her knees, and sat very still. Cam watched her from the shadows of the rosewood tree. Coley and Akins had awakened when Jeffy had disarmed her door lock. They discreetly followed her out. He dismissed them, thinking Jeffy might be in the mood to run naked around the courtyard again. Tonight, though, she'd kept her clothes on. It'd been too cold for her, he figured. He was torn between being disappointed and relieved. He'd heard her softly spoken prayer, and his heart went out to her. He yearned to do away with her loneliness himself. He would, when the time was right. He didn't feel it was right. She wasn't clear yet as to what she exactly wanted to do, or how she wanted to go about doing it. She didn't need him to reappear in her life and muddy up her mind, because almost assuredly, the moment she saw him, she would be furious, to put it mildly. So he would simply keep her safe until she figured out which path she needed to take. One of his biggest concerns when he'd been training was that Jeffy, being psychic, would pick up on his presence. However, his training had included that scenario, and he'd learned his lessons well. He was able to make himself almost invisible. It was amazing what the average human didn't see simply because they didn't expect to see it. Jeffy, on the other hand, was not average. Still, he'd been able to keep himself just out of her radar. "Cam, check in," Coley's voice sounded in his ear. He didn't answer him verbally, but tapped the code on the tiny mic. Agent Christopher Coley had a tendency to worry, not just about Jeffy, but about everyone. He was a good man, young, brave, and a stickler for the rules. Cam knew Jeffy was having fun and relieving her boredom by teasing Coley. He also knew she was attracted to him. What girl wouldn't be? Chris was a good man. It was difficult to stand by and watch, knowing she could possibly elect to start a relationship with him. Coley was a stickler for rules and would probably turn her down, but then again, Jeffy was pretty hard to resist. From what Cam had heard, Jeffy had had only a few relationships since he'd broken up with her, and those few had been pretty rocky. Jeffy had always had a healthy opinion of herself, so it surprised him when he'd heard that she'd lost confidence when it came to men. When all this was over, he intended to put an end to that problem. Sighing softly, he moved back a step when she opened her eyes and stood, wrapping the blanket tightly around herself. She smiled toward the heavens, turned, and made her way slowly toward the building. Cam touched his mic. "She's coming in." "Roger that," Agent Coley answered. New scene. "You can do it," Christopher Coley yelled, urging Jeffy on. "Go, Jeffy, make us proud," Hart Akins added. They shut their mouths abruptly when Abbott Janjawar moved up beside them, yet neither agent could keep the grin from their faces. April 1st had begun as any other day, except for the jokes their resident ghost agent had played. Both Coley's and Aiken's pant legs had been tied in knots, the floor in front of their door greased. Other than that, it was business as usual. Morning meditations and prayers, breakfast, chores and martial arts training, Seulom as practiced by the Shaolin. As honor to their guest, Jeffy was asked to demonstrate some of the martial arts that she'd been taught by her father, who incorporated Seulom into his Zendo-Ryu style. Zendo-Ryu means the complete school of thought and incorporates many techniques. They'd been at the monastery almost 4 months now, and it was only the second time Jeffy had been called upon. She'd been glad to show off a little. Somehow, the discussion had come to abdominal strength, and a challenge had been issued, in good sport, of course. Jeffy, Christopher, and Hart, along with 22 of the monks, because that's how many places were available, held on to a metal bar suspended between two beams. With arms bent, they brought their knees to their chests in time with the beat of a drum. One by one, the monks had begun to drop off. The agents had made it to the final 10 before they'd given out, one right after the other. It was now down to Jeffy and 2 monks. The count was at 367. Jeffy's arms were beginning to tremble, yet so were the monks. Coley and Akins had thought to call some encouragement to her. They nodded at the abbot as he eyed them sternly. Then he broke into a grin and turned toward the action. "Will you let this young woman win this competition?" he said loudly. Everyone began cheering then, Chris and Hart included. Finally, one of the monks dropped off, rubbing his abdomen. Jeffy closed her eyes and tried to concentrate on the movement. It wasn't her stomach muscles that were giving out, it was her biceps. She growled with the effort, pumped out 8 more, and finally dropped from the bar. A great cheer went up from the monks, though they weren't cheering for their win. They were cheering for the competitors. Jeffy was being patted on the back, on the head, on the shoulders. Her arms were being pulled straight and rubbed vigorously while she laughed. Christopher and Hart joined her and congratulated her for going all the way to the end. She made some excuse for them about their heavier body weight being difficult to hold up for so long. Even though it was an excuse, it was actually true, and so they took a tiny bit of comfort. The abbot moved to the center of the group. They immediately quieted. Smiling, he nodded and congratulated all on their stamina and asked them to contemplate what they may have learned about themselves during the course of the exercise. He smiled warmly at Jeffy. "I will see you in my office after the midday meal." Her eyes shifted to his, and she immediately knew what he would tell her. And she nodded. "I'll be there." Abbot Janjawar left the courtyard, and the agents joined Jeffy. "What was that about, do you think?" Chris asked. Jeffy sighed. "I believe I'm being thrown out." A short time later, while Jeffy washed and changed, the agents told Cam what she said. "Well, it's not because of the little impromptu competition," he assured them. "From what I can gather from my latest conversation with her father, both Grandmaster Kino and the abbot believe it's time for Jeffy to venture out into public." "They want her to publicly resume her research?" Coley asked, the worry evident on his face. "No research, not publicly yet, anyway. I think they're going to suggest she move back out into the public eye." "Well, it'd be nice to get back to civilization," Agent Aiken said. "Well, that remains to be seen," Cam said with a smile. He backed away. "If you guys will excuse me, I have things to do." "What do you suppose he meant by that?" Hart asked. "By what?" "That remains to be seen." Chris shrugged. Maybe we're not going back to civilization. Hart frowned. You can always go in. Jason will send a replacement. Hart shook his head. No way. I'm with you on that. I'm not leaving her in anyone else's hands. Christopher smiled. Think positive, like maybe she wants to go to a remote tropical island. New scene. There was no one around when Jeffy approached the abbot's office. She knocked softly. One moment, she heard Abbot Janjawar answer. Jeffy took a seat on an ornate wooden bench just outside the abbot's office. She wore her cream linen pants with the matching tunic and brown leather sandals. Her hair was washed and smoothed back into one long braid. Lifting her feet up, she crossed her legs in front of her on the bench and waited patiently as the moment turned into 15 minutes. She could hear voices coming from inside the office, and her high sense of curiosity drove her crazy as she wondered what they could be talking about. You may come in. Well, she heard that clear enough. Unfolding herself, she rose and went inside. As she approached the abbot's desk, she noticed a monk taking his leave. He was dressed in brown robes, much different than the other monk's saffron-colored attire. She'd glimpsed this one only a few times over the course of their stay. She tried to get a better look at him without being rude, but he had a hood pulled over his head and his face was in shadow. He kept his head bowed and silently left the room. Please sit, the abbot said kindly. Jeffy did so. I'm sorry about the little demonstration today. It wasn't my intention to make any kind of a disturbance. He smiled at her. There was no disturbance. Your performance was inspirational and has been the source of quite a bit of soul-searching among the monks. Oh, Jeffy said, because she could think of nothing else to say. I've spoken to your father. Oh, Jeffy said again. Have you made any progress in your research? I believe I have, actually. I've compiled a huge amount of data to substantiate my thought process. Currently, I'm waiting on some more lab results. Once I have them, I feel certain I'll be well on the way to putting together a module. If I may be so bold as to ask, what are your intentions? Jeffy took a full minute to put her thoughts in order. I intend to take steps to rid the world of disease. I intend to bypass all the governmental red tape and get the information and the reports out that will set the world's research scientists on the correct path. Then you don't intend to keep your information to yourself so that you will get credit as the one who changed the world? Oh, me getting credit is not what's important. I know you understand that and simply wish to hear me say it. What I intend is to blast so much information out there that powerful government officials won't be able to suppress it, and powerful doctors and scientists won't be able to deny it. And how will you do this? I intend to blindside the media. Before the bad guys know what hit them, the information will be out. I cured AIDS. The world will listen to me. My family and I are reputable. They will try to destroy our credibility, but it won't work. This will be a dangerous undertaking. Yes, sir, it will. The abbot sat perfectly still. His eyes drifted closed. Jeffy did not fidget. She knew he reached out to the heavens for inspiration. After almost half an hour, he opened his eyes. You will leave here. She frowned. I'm not sure that I'm ready. Your mind is clear as to what you want to do. You have had time to find your peace. You have crossed a line. Crossed a line? You've moved from searching for serenity and guidance to hiding. Jeffy drew in a deep breath, thinking to argue. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw nothing but love and respect and kindness and concern, and drawing on her patience, she took a moment to consider what he was saying. Had she been hiding? Well, of course, she'd been hiding from the men who were trying to kill her, hiding her research from them, but that wasn't the reason she'd come to the monastery. She'd come, as he said, to find peace and get her mind clear as to her intentions, and she'd known for weeks now what her course of action would be. Why was she waiting to pursue that? Maybe she had grown comfortable. It was too easy to stay here and live apart from the world. He was right. She'd been hiding. It was time for her to leave. She had to be in the fray in order to stay sharp. She had to keep the eye of the tiger, so to speak, and to do that, she had to be in the thick of things, in the very basic thick of things. Jeffy nodded her head slowly, and the abbot smiled. Do you know where you'll go? Yes, to Africa. There are several medical facilities that our foundation has set up there. I intend to check on them and then set up more clinics. A lot more. Abbot John Jawar nodded. This is a very large task in itself. Will this become another sidetrack to your original goal? No, this is a stepping stone. I will once again be in the public eye. To others, it will appear I'm merely doing the Mother Teresa type of thing. I will be earning my brownie points with the public, while at the same time I finish my research. And when the time is right, I'll blast the media with my findings. I'll do it in a way that the universities who are in the government's pockets and the pharmaceuticals and the government-controlled media in every country will not be able to do anything other than jump on the bandwagon. This is a lofty goal. Well, I believe it to be reachable. Because you believe, then it is reachable. She nodded and looked up. Do you believe? I do. I believe in you. Go forth, Dr. Kino. Be strong and do not waver. And that is the end of chapter 2.